All right, well, nice to see all of you. I know a lot of you. I don't know all of you. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Brandon Matsumoto. I'm a middle school math teacher at Elizabeth Pinkerton Middle School. And this is the brains of our operation, as always, Miss Kelly Lebsock. She is also my cluster partner over at Elizabeth Pinkerton Middle School. And as I told the first group, it won't take long till you figure out who really is the brains of the operation. It's definitely not me. And you'll find that out in about 10 minutes, if you haven't figured it out already. I want to first start talking about sixth grade teachers real quick, and it's not really part of our contextualization and creativity part. Amazing thing happened. So however difficult your year was last year, we spent an awful lot of time getting kids to talk mathematics. And this year was a different year. Our kids, and I'm not talking our honors kids or accelerated, our grade level kids from the first 30 seconds of the first day could talk. So
in a positive way.
In a positive way. It was unbelievable, where I would normally take weeks to set up a classroom. I'm a little stickler of how I want things done. I accidentally said, because we were training for it, turn to your A and B partner. I didn't even explain to him what it was. And tell him what you think happened when somebody added 5 to both sides. And without even working hard at it, boom, each person turned to their cluster partner and they just started talking. And I walked around the room and it was all about that problem. So it took me 30 seconds to set up how these kids speak in class, and I guarantee it's part of your struggle or your successes from the previous year. So we really appreciated that. It's something that we've struggled with in years past, and I think it was amazing. I think that happened for you as well.
Yeah, I think that no matter how rough the transition has been, know that we're seeing the benefits of it already with students just having even 1 year. I know some of our students have had 2 years of GoMath, but once they have gotten to us, I mean, my students' ability, I was talking to them about this yesterday because we were going over the standard, or the mathematical practice number 2, which was to
reason abstractly
and quantitatively. And it's the strongest group I've had yet that is able to do that, and that's because of the struggles that you guys have gone through in transitioning to the GoMath and to the Common Core.
Yeah, so just know it's welcomed, and it's been a pleasure having some of your kids. We have the unique setup as well, because we're taking kids from probably 30 different elementary schools. So it's really kind of a unique setup for us, and we're really enjoying that. So we're going to start off and introduce you. I don't know if you've heard of kind of a thing called I Notice and I Wonder. And this is something that I heard the math generation people talking about. They were just in a corner talking one day, and I heard somebody say something about I notice and wonder, and so I just left them because they didn't really want to talk to me, and I went and just typed in I notice and I wonder, and out pops from a math forum all these things and activities about I notice and wonder. So we're going to actually run you through that. You can either write it on your whiteboard, or you can write it right in the handout that we gave us. Maybe make a column of I notice and make a column of I wonder. And I want you to take this prompt. It says, a hot air balloon begins its descent at a rate of 22.5 feet per minute. We would like you guys to write down everything that you notice about that. And there has to be things that you're wondering about. So please write both of those down. We'll take a few minutes to just have you write it down individually, and then we're going to actually have you share it within your group, and then we're going to kind of record some things, because we'd like to tell you kind of why we do that and why we think it's a great starter for kids. So when you start sharing this out, what we'd like you to do is just share it with your, like an elbow partner, and then expand that conversation to your group. And we want to see kind of what the similarities in what you saw and what your partner saw. So when you're ready, you can go ahead and start doing that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start over here. Whether you report out something that somebody said to you, or share it with you, or something you want to share, give us something over here that you noticed.
That we noticed?
Yeah.
It's going down.
It's going down. And what word made you think that it might be going down?
Descent.
Oh, the word descent. So we might be building in some academic language with descent. All right. Do you think all of your 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders know what the word descent means? Right? I was surprised about that. I was too, this year when we taught this lesson. All right. How about you guys? Do you have something different that you noticed? that you noticed about the problem?
That it's going down at a constant rate.
It's going down at a constant rate. All right. So when you say constant rate, we bring that into our new module that we had this year, module 4. It was a constant rate of change. And it was very humbling because I was very confused. I was teaching this lesson on constant of the proportionality, constant rate of change. And I said, it's so weird that sometimes when they use the word slope, they don't really have any units. And then sometimes they use a constant rate of change. And I was actually a little confused about that. And a grade level kid raises his hand. Well, what I noticed, Mr. Matsumoto, is when they use the constant rate of change and they have the units in there, they're using it in context. If you notice that the things that I think you called quantities that are listed, and it's on a graph or in a table, but the table is listed. And when they're just using slope, they're just talking about a line that the only units they have is just the 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was like, that's a good description. Been teaching math a long time, and this year I was just a little confused of why they kept going back and forth and at what point. And I should have noticed it, but I certainly didn't. So that was kind of a good, humbling experience. All right. How about you guys? Anything different that you noticed?
We talked about the units.
Okay, so the feet per,
Thing about
what that might mean. Okay. All right. Now the biggie is, are you wondering about anything? Are you wondering about anything? I mean, I wonder about a lot of things in this one. So what do you guys wonder about? What are you wondering in this problem?
Like we had a group member wonder whether they were like in a mountainous region or if they were above a valley.
Okay. And I think in the last group we had somebody say, how high up are they? Yeah, where are they at? How high up? What else are you wondering? Yeah.
I was wondering how they were going to get it to stop.
So if you have that constant rate of change, is it going to be a 22.5 feet per minute landing? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Go ahead, Gary.
There's no question.
There's no question.
What is
There's no question.
that question?
Yeah, I looked at that, and let me ask you this. Do you think there was a question? Okay. Okay. So Kelly will talk a little bit about that here in a minute. So why do we do I notice and I wonder? Why would I do that sometimes? We felt like, especially when you're decontextualizing and contextualizing this, as we know it's old school word problems, that kids look at it and then about 50% of them give up before they even start. They read the question, if they even get to the question, and they say, I'm done. Every kid in our classes, if you give them these 2 prompts about I notice and whether they can write something down. It may not be totally on point, but we also have this thing called the best know. Well, that's not really what I was looking for, but you bring up a good point. So that's something that I've been getting better at each and every day, is that getting out of that mindset of that only teaching everything mutually exclusive and focusing, oh, that's not in my lesson plan, I have to go. And taking what somebody says, trying to create an environment where they're sharing, and then going with that. So I still spend a great deal of time lesson planning, but I spend most of my time just logging in about 4 miles a period, figuring out what kids are saying, why they're saying it, and then addressing it. So that's really what I notice and wonder is for us, we can get every kid started. And it could be in a warm-up, it could be in a ticket out the door, it can be just in a group setting like we did here in the share out. Sometimes we do this thing where we do a group share, debrief we call it, and then a group present. So somebody will come up and present kind of their ideas. We did it more as a whole group. Do you guys have any questions about I notice and I wonder? What did you think of the activity? Could kids do this? Yeah, I think they could.
How long do you take every day to?
You know what? It really depends. I think it depends. If I use it as a warm-up, we're talking about 5 to 10 minutes. One of the things that I notice about how I'm trying to shift my teaching is it's really hard to put a time on anything anymore. I could look at that and say, this is going to take us 2 minutes in pairs. No, 2 minutes, I call it a 2-2-2. 2 minute individual, 2 minute in pairs, 2 minute in groups. So that's a total of 6. Share out 2 or 3. It could be a 9-minute thing, and unfortunately it could go a long time depending on what you hear kids say. I try not to let like a warm-up become my overall lesson, but I would be lying to you if I didn't say sometimes it just does. It's so good that you have a hard time stopping. So you really have to be cognizant of your time frame. This is why Ms. Lebsock and I also, we have this pacing guide that we do for our department, and she's done the whole year for us. I usually do like 2 days because I really don't know where I'm going to be. And just so she keeps me on track, and She keeps me organized.
Going to get through the book. That's all.
Well,
That's all I'm here for.
yeah. All right, so
So the main thing about I notice and I wonder when you're looking to create these in your own classroom is to forget the problem. So Brandon got that problem, literally just opened up the textbook, I think to module 1, and picked a word problem that was in there, which in GoMath, they're everywhere, so it's not hard to find one. And then he just deleted the question. So the question was, I think, something like, how long would it take them to go negative 315 feet or something like that?
Yeah.
It was, and then that gets you talking with your kids about why would it say negative 315 feet if it's already saying descend? Like, doesn't descend mean negative? Can you have negative distance? And you get in those conversations too. But forgetting the problem in the beginning, because that's going to take away those barriers that keep kids from thinking that they can't do word problems, and it just opens them up to the story. And especially with girls in our classes, the story is what hooks them. And so when we're trying to get girls invested in math, the story is really where it's at. And so being able to look at I notice and I wonder, and there's not really any, they can't get these wrong. They can't notice the wrong things or wonder the wrong things. And so it's also about providing those positive learning experiences for our students that are going to help them retain that information, because that's what brain growth tells us, right? And that mindset, that growth mindset versus fixed, is when they're having those positive learning experiences, they're recalling those easier. Then they brainstorm the notice and wonder. And then the last part is kind of telling them, if this were a story, if this story were the start of a math problem, what could the math problem be? Or what are the questions that you could answer with the given information? Or what are other things that you need to know in order to answer anything about this question? Because we can't really, there can't really be a question to that without more given information, right? I mean, I guess there could be a question like, are they going up or down, right? But that would, besides that, we need a little bit more data before we can answer any questions about the math of it. So some perks to why we would use I notice, I wonder. They understand the story, the quantities, and the relationships in the problem. So it's giving them context so that they can go back and check their answers. I noticed when I was working with integers that when we were working in the word problems, they were way better with their positives and negatives because it made sense. Then if I just gave them, a 5 minus 7 on the board, then they were less likely to put the negative 2 than they were if I put it in the context of a word problem, because they're like, oh, they went lower than before, so now it's negative. They went further down than they went up. And so kind of having that contextualization made them rationalize why it would be negative. And they were much better with their integers than I had seen in the past. Understanding what the problem's asking and what the answer will look like when we finally do introduce the problem, and then having some ideas to begin to solve the problem. And then the context to check your answer at the end. So this is one that I did just this week. When we were preparing this presentation, I was like, hey, I did this. We're in module 8 for grade 7, which is about scale drawings and stuff. So it says a blueprint is a technical drawing that usually displays architectural plans. Pete's blueprint shows a layout of a house. Every 4 inches in the blueprint represents 3 feet of the actual house. One of the walls in the blueprint is 24 inches long. And then all I did, because we snip for our PowerPoints, we just snip it straight from the book, the online book, to go on here, is I just put like a white box over that question. And so they didn't see the question. That was already there. They didn't see the question. I mean, it was in their textbook, so they could read it. But for some reason, they always look at the screen instead of their book. So it worked out just fine. And then we just talked about what we noticed and what we're wondering about this picture. And I got some things that were really on task, and some things that were a little bit off task. But it was still good. There were no wrong answers. Why are there stairs going to nowhere? Why doesn't this house have a back door? Doesn't every house have a back door? I don't know. Does every house have a back? I don't think this one does. And then the idea that they were able to really get the sense that it was a house. And so they were really contextualizing. They were in the house, understanding that obviously this has to be the scale drawing, because 24 inches is no size of a living room. There's no room to live in 24 inches, right? And then they were able to recontextualize once they got their answer to see if it made sense. If they got, because the scale was 4 inches was 3 feet. If they got that this right here was supposed to represent 4 inches, they're like, wait, can a bathtub and a toilet fit in that space? Could a pantry and a stove and part of a sink fit in that space? And they were thinking about what this really meant. And I didn't, necessarily write down what they notice and what they wonder, but I just asked them, what does this mean? And then when we went back through, the book actually was the one that was saying, does your answer make sense? And I think that that's one thing that our GoMath book does pretty strongly, is always bringing them back to, does your answer make sense? Can you recontextualize it and see if it should be positive, if it should be negative? And so trying to find those strengths in the GoMath textbook is also a great thing. Is this still me? Yes, it is. Okay. So we decided to work on contextualization and creativity first and foremost because it was the most powerful lesson that I had had this year. We were working on solving equations and inequalities, and part of the textbook is a section on using words to describe a two-step equation. So they give you like 2x plus 5 equals 20, and then they have to describe, like create a real-world problem using that equation. And last term I had 2 accelerated classes and 1 grade level, and my grade level was at the end of the day after I had already taught my accelerated classes. So you're in that mindset, and it was just a rougher group of kids, and I say that with that Pinkerton kind of like I get it, it's not that rough, but it was just the most powerful lesson I'd had. They were so engaged, and they were talking to each other respectfully, which is something I'd worked on with that class all term. And they were just excited to be creative and share what they had come up with. And I also noticed that they were solving the two-step equations while they were creating their real-world problems, because they were like thinking of the context of it, and they got the answer from contextualizing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, you just solved it. I mean, you weren't supposed to, but you did, and so I'm not going to get mad at that. So that was the why behind this, and so we'll kind of go through that lesson that prompted this, and then how we can do it in other ways besides full lessons, because we don't always have a full lesson to spend on this kind of thing. But where can we have those creative, exciting, engaging moments with our students besides, the full lesson days? But I mean, a full day of it, that was awesome. All right, the how, that's what I'm talking about in terms of, is it going to be a full lesson, mini lessons? Can you do it for warm-ups, tickets out the door? Alternative forms of assessment. So ways by having kids create their own problems and solve those problems, how that can be an alternative form of assessment. And that's also the when, because when can we ever fit it in, But I feel like they could give us, 3 standards and we would still fill it because we just have so many ideas. We would still feel like we don't have enough time because we want to go so far with our kids. And that's just the life of a teacher. And then this is all just fully dependent on our ability to get our kids to talk with each other in our structured student interactions. So Brandon's going to go into kind of how we set up our rooms to facilitate those interactions.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but something really weird happened when I presented this in the first session. They really were interested in the how it's set up and why it works. So I'll try to kind of go through this, but as I praised the 6th grade teachers about how your kids communicate, we also have to take into mind there's a lot of baggage kids bring, and we want to focus, and I want to have those kids have immediate success. So I spend a great deal of time on my setup in my classroom, and I've experimented over 26 years, and every year it's even a little bit different. I think it's that way for classes and periods and years of classes and different periods that you have. So I wanted to just kind of briefly talk a little bit about our seating chart and why and how much time I spend on it to make sure we have some possibility for success. So instead of traditionally straight rows, I have straight rows, but they're in A-B rows. So if there's 6 kids there, or 6 on one side, 6 on the other, they're actually together, kind of like this, but in pairs. So we're really in pairs, just like this here. But I actually consider that, and I call one row A and one row B, but I also consider this group here their 4 group. So oftentimes I'll be having them just do elbow work. I say, A partner, tell your B partner something you learned from the video. And then you hear all of A's telling something all of B. And I'll say, B partner, tell A something that you think that they missed. So that's just an example of how I go to A to B. Occasionally I'll even go A to A, and they just turn around. So they'll literally just turn around and talk to each other. Sometimes I'll say 4 group, no, don't move. And they know that they might talk in their elbow partner, their A and B partner, and then transition to their 4 group before I ask another question. So I really kind of think about that. And even beyond that and kids in their seat, I'll blow up kind of like an example of a 4 group right here. I actually, after every assessment, or summative assessment, I think they're all formative actually, I actually rank every kid in the class. 1 through 32, 1 through 40, whatever it is. Let's say 1 through 40, I rank them all. To the strongest kid, to what we might say, at least on paper, the weakest kid. And then I actually go through and say, we have 10 groups of 4. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'll go back and go 10, 9, 8, 7, kind of like a draft or a lottery. And then I'll regroup them. So where group 1 might have the strongest kid, they'll also have the weakest kid. And then I even set them within that, the parameters of this foregroup, where the strongest kid in that group's here, the next strongest is here, and then the kid in the middle's here, and what we would consider the weakest kid's here. And I know it seems kind of weird that I do that, but I think it matters that you're spreading out success. And if you notice too, where's 1 and 4? Aren't they elbow partners? And 2 and 3. So I specifically do that probably every 2 weeks. And then we teach them to get in. I know I've had some visitors at the school before, and they said, how do you get them in and out of groups so fast? There's no way we can do that. We practice it, literally on day 1. And I call it right corners in the middle. So if you notice, this corner is already in the middle. So they'll get up, and I teach them, they'll move, and they'll transition right here. While these 3 are moving their seats, this person gets the materials for the group. So I might even just put the quizzes up front, or the group assignment up front. So I specifically have that a certain way. And then obviously when they get back out of groups, this person's turning in all the materials. So we do it really for a specific reason. And I spend some time, I probably spend a good half hour on each class every 2 weeks to create this system. We have kids that might have 504s, so I highlight them, so I make sure I move them to the front. If there was, I don't know about at your school, but oftentimes we get from the counselors, hey, Jimmy and Sam got in a fight and they can't sit next to each other anymore. So I highlight those guys, and if Jimmy's an 18 and Sam's a 1, I switch out Jimmy with a 19 or a 20 or 7. So I specifically quantitate it as well. And I've gotten a little bit better, so it's a lot faster. So about 25 to 30 minutes per class. I have 3 classes. So it's something that I think helps. I think helps kids communicate, and it gives them a sense of, being able to communicate kind of at their level if they're going to go like a 4 to 3 or just in a whole group. Now, the other thing that we've changed, and we haven't really changed, we've done this quite a bit. I was more trained in a traditional style where if they're not in rows and they're not quiet, they have 0 chance to learn. That was what my first probably 15, 20 years of teaching was like. If they're not in rows and they're not quiet, they have no chance of learning. So this transition for me has been big as well, and that shift for me. So going back, I'm a math guy, so we quantitate everything, right? So we changed our grading system this year at Pinkerton Middle School to add what we call collaboration points. Everybody's realizing now for kids to communicate, it gives us something to talk about, but we actually have a collaboration points that's weighted as our overall grade. So it's something that has helped us a great deal. And Kelly will actually share a story it's a kind of actually amazing story. But for example, again, I'm just going to kind of quickly, briefly go through this. If we had a group assignment or a group quiz, I'm going to tell them, everybody, your group gets 12 points, all right? And I'm going to walk around with a clipboard the whole time. And if Hannah is talking to Madison, I'm going to say group 7, group 8, you lost 1 point for being off task. And one of the things that's helped me is, being an old wrestling coach, I was always pretty a confrontive guy. And so if a kid's not acting right, I'm in their face. Well, it creates other issues and other tension. That kid shuts down. He's done for the day, whether he redirects well or not. So this is more I'm just a record keeper. And somebody showed me this, I think it was Mark Freethy, it was amazing how there's literally these, 3 kids are saying, hey, you just lost a point, let's go. And I've seen it done at a lot of different sites, and so it would, obviously maybe easier at where we're at, but it really has worked really, really well. So any questions on that? I mean, they had a lot of questions last time about what we called this and why we chose those. And this is odd, we kind of brainstormed these 3 things probably 7 years ago when we were starting up the school. And think about how they line up for getting kids to talk. Obviously you want them on task. Obviously you want them to have math talk. And this independence piece for me is that idea that they're trying to work things out in their group. So a good example would be, you always have that 1 or 2 kids that no matter, they're not even done reading half of the problem, they're always raising their hand, need my help. So I would walk over and I would say, you have a question? And I said, what's her question? And if they can't say it, it's -1 and I just walk away, right? And they're like, oh man, what's your question? Don't call them over until you talk to us. So it's kind of like that force cooperation and collaboration, and it doesn't really take it took half the time I thought it would for them to get used to that. They still get mad when they lose points, but I do it differently, and it's, you know, I think my blood pressure went way down doing this system than getting on a kid and making sure they were wrong and I was right, and so it's kind of a neat thing where, oh, you're talking about the movies, oh, okay, math talk.
Question, so where do you go with these points? I mean, what is it?
Okay, so at our school we have 3 levels of points now. We have assessment points, homework points, and we added a 3rd column with collaboration points. We believe in this system and getting kids to talk so much that we changed it from a 60% test, 40% homework, to a 60-30-10. So technically daily homework is only worth, at our school right now, 10% of their overall grade. Yeah, so we kept the assessment at the same piece. We're finding the kids, if you piloted, did anybody pilot GoMath last year prior to adopting? Did you notice that your grades in your class dropped significantly? Yet for me, my anecdotal information is that they were doing better, but I couldn't get the assessment piece aligned. You know, my C kid is a D kid, my B kid's a C kid, my A kid's a B kid. And the one A kid that got an A out of 100 kids, he probably should have been in a higher class. I was just having a hard time calibrating. That's tough for me because you want it to match what you know you hear them saying. And so bringing this piece in has kind of fixed that. It's fixed it. There are some outliers. There are some kids that are getting D's and low C's on their tests, and because some of the collaboration points, they usually get full credit, they're getting C plus B minuses. But I would rather err on that side, where it might be slightly inflated, but I'm still getting them to communicate and talk through the mathematics, than say, that kid's a D kid, I gotta find a way to get him a D. It's just not that important in 7th and 8th grade. When you guys get to high school classes and you're talking about your A through G required classes, I think that's a different story and being competitive getting into college. But for me, at our level, and I would even say K through 8, it's, you know, where's your focus? You know, so if a D plus kid gets a C plus one term, it doesn't really hurt anybody. And I've never thought I would ever say that. If you asked me that, even as early as 5 years ago, I'd say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. But I just truly believe in it now. So could you do a quick story about your 10th grade class, or you want me to do it? You want me to embellish for you?
You can embellish afterward. I'll tell you the truth, and then he can make me sound better than I am.
I can do that.
So I started at Pinkerton when I was an intern. So I wasn't credentialed yet, and Pinkerton was on the same campus as CO, so we were right here. I was building over. And I had a group of, I think I had 24 8th grade algebra honors students who were struggling in algebra honors, so they made a little class of them. So that was super tough. But then they're like, oh, let's fill your schedule with a class of 38 repeat algebra kids. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds fun. But I was used to what I had been doing at Pinkerton, and they had given me this structure for collaborative grouping, and I guess that I didn't know that most people don't do a lot of collaborative grouping, or especially when they're not actually teachers yet. And so I used this, even with my 38 repeat algebra students, to do group quizzes and group activities when, I was being told, you can't do groups with those kids, there's gonna be a fight, and, and sometimes there were, but not during the group activities. And if there was, they got points taken off. Just kidding. But yeah, it was really beneficial as a new teacher to have that structure in place for collaborative grouping. So if you guys have new teachers who are at your sites who are looking to incorporate grouping into their classrooms and they're struggling with it because it is hard with classroom management when you're first, when you're first in the classroom, this was a great starting place for me to get me comfortable with doing something that I said last time I probably shouldn't have been doing yet, but that worked, and that I was able to be successful with because I had this structure for it, and the students had the structure for it. And so it became structured student interaction instead of just chaos.
So quickly, I will add to that. She is being very, very, very humble. I don't know if you've ever went into a 9th grade algebra class. Somebody teaches some in here, I think. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge. Now, take a 10th grade repeater, and not 20 to 1, 38 to 1. It usually has a success rate of 10%, 15% at best. That year, it was one of our, one of the CST years. And if you didn't know this, usually under 25% of all freshmen, sophomores get proficient advanced on a CST. And I think usually 90% fail the second time around is usually what the national average is. Her classes had the highest CST score that year, and we had some department chairs teaching algebra that year, and her 10th grade repeaters outperformed the 9th grade grade level, the 9th grade kids that were sort of going to be on an accelerated track. So it was really quite a feat. And she said she has attributed to some of the strategies that she was using with her 8th grade kids as well. So it was pretty amazing.
Mark Ruthie and Brandon Matsumoto as my master teachers. So no one can lose with that.
Not that impressive. So she learned in spite of her lack of leadership. So we need to get you guys doing a little bit of math. So I'm going to try to roll through this really quick. Our school really tries to use any way we can to connect math. We try to teach math, not teach math mutually exclusive. Sometimes we just don't have enough time to see all the connections. I mean, you could be teaching a book for 10 years and you still might not see all the connections. So I know it's hard, but we always like, for example, this is a quick one. We teach equations and inequalities together. There are so many similarities to them and very few differences that I think it was out of Marzano's book. One of the key concepts to a good room is connecting the math and having some similarities and some differences. So we focus on whenever we can combine things together, we can combine it together. It doesn't mean we did 6-3 and 7-2, which was writing two-step inequalities and writing two-step equations in one day. Certainly was probably over a span of 2 to 3 days. And just to show you, this is, again, I'm just going to whiz through this. We snip from their book, and then we either cover and uncover it, or we add to it. So for example, this is just a question that we added. So if you're in the GoMath book, you'll notice that there are essential questions, but also sometimes there's some leading questions for each example, and sometimes even the U-tries. We try to put those in there, even as open-ended. What is represented on the scale? How can you change what is on the scale to create some new equations? I believe that came right out of the teacher resources part. So we try to use those as much as we can. Something as little as, this was their explore activity with a 3x, and then the reflect. What would you change because it's a negative 3x? And so we use as many of those as we can. So again, a lot more to our standard lesson. We'll, if you needed that, that's great. By the way, if you're middle school and you ever need, we've shared stuff with every site, PowerPoints. Even if you're interested in that grouping scoring, just send one of us an email. We have it on our server, or come over with a flash drive and take anything off our server. I think this guy probably stole maybe 1,000 hours of my work. He brought this, I thought he was going to bring a flash drive. It was some kind of, what was that?
External hard drive.
Oh, external hard drive. It was big. And it was just making some noise. So we're really all about sharing at our school site and thoughts and ideas, and maybe we can even share some visitations and stuff. Okay.
So this is the lesson that just kind of started it all. After I taught this lesson to my students, I went to Brandon, and they were sending out all those things like, we need presenters, we need presenters. And I was like, Brandon, are you going to do a presentation? Because I just had this awesome lesson and I want to talk about it. And it was from the 6-3, 7-2 that, like we said, we combined to kind of gain some time, but it's not really gaining time. It's like you get to choose where you put your time instead. And so we spent a whole day with just the describing the, creating a real world problem from an equation. And it was awesome. And this is kind of the setup that we had. They completed the your turn on their whiteboard, and then they switched problems with their elbow partner, and they were able to give feedback and then help correct any mistakes that the students had made. And we did this a couple times. And then we talked about how it would change if you had an inequality, like what are the situations where you have one solution versus multiple solutions, because that's really the difference with inequalities, is the multiple solution versus one solution. And so it was just really powerful. And after that, I was like, where can we fit this in other places? Because it's not going to be all the time that we have an actual section in our book dedicated to this. But there are a lot of times in GoMath where we have at least like a question that is dedicated to that. And so just trying to find that with each section at least, not each module. All the sections, chapters, I'm like, I don't even know. But modules, which are the chapters now, I think, not necessarily each lesson, not necessarily each day, but each concept kind of being able to have that contextualization and then also the creativity piece, which is faster. You're going to have more time to be able to have students create problems than contextualize problems, in my opinion. And so if you're looking for a quick sponge activity, the create is going to be where we're going to find it. So Brandon came up with an idea of how we could scaffold this concept if you have students. Brandon teaches our special ed strand at our site, and so and he teaches these same PowerPoints. But this is something he might do or I might do if my students are struggling to work backwards to build those word problems. So if we had 3m plus 10 equals 130, we subtracted 10. So actually working out through the math because they had already done this. Dividing by 3, getting that m equals 40, and then working backwards and saying, okay, what could m equals 40 represent? And we've talked about how the variables we don't have to choose x and y, and sometimes we use a variable that makes sense with the context of the problem so that you know what that variable represented. So I guess a kid told them there were 40 monkeys. So we started there with, okay, there were 40 monkeys, and now let's work backwards through the rest of this program. So here we have 3 groups of monkeys made up a total of 120 monkeys. All right, and then there were 10 monkeys that left or something because there were an extra 10 here, but now they're not here. So, 10 monkeys must have escaped, right? But they were there originally. So there were 130 monkeys at the zoo. 10 of them escaped from their cages, and the other monkeys were split into 3 even groups. How many monkeys are in each group? Right, and you could do a bunch of versions of this problem, still talking about monkeys, still talking about escaping, but you could reword this a bunch of different ways. So even if you just had them start here with there were 40 monkeys, you're going to have, depending on how many kids you have in your class, 30 different stories, or 46.
An actual example of what a kid was telling me as we were walking through that. And the one thing that that came out about it that was a little confusing, you said you can have different variations. For some reason, once they get stuck on a topic, the next 10 were about monkeys.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, can we change that?
I had the same thing with T-Rexes in my room.
Yeah, so they get on one thing and they feel really good about it, and they start thinking about variations of monkeys, and it's kind of clever, but then you might even just change the topic. How about dogs?
Yeah.
Or cats.
There were birds that were chirping outside of my window, which annoys me during class. And the door was open, and I was like, oh, who's whistling? Oh my gosh, it's birds, springtime or something. But I walked out, and there were like an incredible amount of birds in this tree. It was really creepy. And so I just, whatever it was up there, I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, there are 3 trees, and there are a ton of birds in them. And then there are 10 that are like still coming down. I think that there are like 130 birds out there. How many do you think is in each tree? Like I just randomly, because the birds were chirping, turned this into a different problem, and they were like, oh, we see what you did. You're still not cool. Like I tried really hard. All right, so there are other ways for us to opportunities for contextualization and creativity. And when I'm talking about creativity, it's the idea, the contextualization is making the word problem. Creativity is just creating a problem. So if we're working on 2-step equations, create a 2-step equation. And the book had a lot of questions like this where it was like, create a 2-step equation where the solution is x equals 2. And so the kids had to work backwards from x equals 2 to create a 2-step equation. And then I think that we had done in a practice test, I had given a problem that was like create a problem that has combining like terms and distributive property that when simplified, you get 0. And they were like, there's not a question here. I'm like, well, I mean, they're not a question, but there's a prompt. And they're like, but there's not just an answer. You're right, there are lots of answers. So come up with something that's gonna work for this, and kind of having that creativity where that doesn't take as long, I don't think, to do than the contextualization. It takes a little bit longer. So that's where we can fit it into some smaller places in time. So things like warm-ups, even for a warm-up, if you're doing, you just did 2-step equations the day before, and I say 2-step equations because that's what that first lesson was on. So that's what's in my head. Have each student create a 2-step equation and then switch with their elbow partners, solve that 2-step equation. They created and solved within that 10-minute time when the bulletin's going anyways. And so it's a good use of your time, a good sponge activity for any extra time that you have. You could use it as a ticket out the door. I think writing the word problems is a good ticket out the door too. I always use Post-its, and then they put them on the whiteboard as they're leaving, and I can kind of put them into groups as to like kids who got it and didn't get it when I'm picking them up off the whiteboard. And that also kind of becomes an assessment. But then maybe there was one that you really liked and you use that as the warm-up the next day, and then the kid sees that the problem they wrote is the warm-up, and that's really exciting for them. Same idea with having them create their own like test questions or questions that are going to go on assessments. Quick partner talks, and that's what I'm talking about, just the like create a problem and switch, or create a problem and check to see that that problem made sense, or that it was a two-step equation, that they didn't just write x equals 0, because that would be common. And then most new concepts throughout the textbook allow for contextualization and creativity opportunities. I think the integers section in the beginning of the 7th grade book does a great job of contextualizing everything, and it really helped the kids with understanding why an answer would be positive or why it would be negative. So I thought that was really powerful. So I would like for you guys to work right now, probably individually first, but then of course sharing or working together, and Brandon and I will be walking around if you guys need to get some things flowing, to create a short activity that you could use with a lesson you're teaching in the near future. So I looked at what I'm teaching on Monday, which is cross sections for Math 7. And so something that I could do at the end of the day, get their whiteboards out and say, okay, draw a 3-dimensional shape that might have this cross section. I just picked a shape that was on the PowerPoint shapes, right? And so then they could, 3-dimensional drawings, they're all going to be pretty bad because I can't draw 3-dimensionally very well. But it gives them a chance to just have that opportunity to try and to do it on a whiteboard, which they all think is so fun, and things like that. So that's kind of a short activity that I really do plan on using on Monday. So hopefully you guys can take some time right now to find something that you could find useful on Monday.
And a variation of things that we've done like that is we've had groups come up with questions, and then they turn them in, and that's the quiz tomorrow, whether it be in groups or individual, and they really like to see their own problem. So we'll have them actually do a worked out solution key on the back of theirs, and I'll look at it and just type in a really quick one, and even by period, and sometimes they really like to see their own problem. So that's very, yeah.
They do answer these questions too. So on the back of each square they answer it. So I pull it over and are they right?
Yeah. There yeah.
It's kind of anonymous unless the kid gives themselves away.
Sure,
Right.
Sure. Well, it's a great way to check for understanding and then give them ownership of how they're developing a problem.
Yeah. Any other ways? Don't have to share. Okay. So that kind of leads into this very last part, which is about how this can be used as assessment opportunities, because really even in that review, you are assessing. And obviously the ticket out the door, is a small check for understanding assessment as well. But we kind of had brainstormed some ways that we could use this as an alternative assessment. Maybe as one of those ways that we give choices to our students back from, the keynote speaker. So group edits, Mr. Lebsock actually told me about this one, Garrett, where he will have his students create problems, and then they'll switch with someone like in their group of 4, they would pass to the left or pass to the right, and then they would edit, and then the student would have a chance to go back and rewrite the question, and then they'd switch again and have that chance to edit. Because in math we give fewer opportunities, I would say, to revise their work than they get maybe when they're doing a rough draft and stuff in their English classes, and so giving them that opportunity to go back and switch up, how they'd written it. He does it a lot with the justifying your answers, which isn't necessarily in the contextualization, but if they're writing a word problem and then can go back and edit it, they're going to have more confidence if they get that chance to go back and fix it if they know they made a mistake. Student-created problems, so what we were talking about just now, about having students create problems, and then either using those for assessments or kind of using that as the assessment. If they can create a 2-step equation where the solution is x equals 2, they're probably going to be able to solve that one as well, because they had to know the solution in order to get to the question. Review days, so once again kind of talked about that, ticket out the door, and then groups debriefing and presenting, which Brandon does almost daily.
Yeah, this is something that I do quite a bit, where if we're in a group setting, I might even say group 1 debrief last night's homework assignment number 4, you guys do 8 and you guys do 9, maybe the key and the meat of the lesson. And then I walk around and I can hear them debriefing the problem. And then they could actually call me over And then I call it debriefing and presenting because they're debriefing it in groups, and then they're going to present there to the class. So most of the kids are very well versed with going to the doc cam, changing it over, making it bigger and smaller. They're better at it than most adults that have never used it. No offense to you guys, but we can test that theory if you'd like. They do really well with that. And I've gotten more letters from kids, hey, you know, at first I thought you were forcing me to do that, but it's really helped me be more confident. And they didn't even talk about the math, unfortunately. They talked about just being more confident. Because even the accelerated kids, you know, if you have old style learners where they just do whatever you tell them to do, and they're going to be the best people with arithmetic, and they're always going to be good, they go home and do their homework. Some of them have a hard time communicating. And so we have to give them as many opportunities to do that, and this is one of them. And I actually even keep track of who's presenting, so one person doesn't always do it. I had it to one class where they literally would walk up and they would check off their own name, and then they'd say, you only have 2, you're going tomorrow. And then they walk up and they start going. So they start taking care of each other because they know if somebody has 9 and one has 2, they're all in trouble. And so it's kind of just a unique way to kind of keep track of that and ensure that every kid's getting an opportunity. It's, as Kelly said earlier, I teach the special ed, we called it in the old days the push-in model. And, you know, I've had kids that will go up that will have a, you know, paraeducator next to them, you know, IQ at 60, and they're communicating their ideas, and kids are listening and they're contributing. And I'll even ask, what do you think he could have said to expand on what he was talking about? And kids would put in, you know, their contribution. So it's been working very well for us so far.